how do you figure out which way is up when you've got a lot going on, right? Because, I talk with clients about this in terms of their business all the time, but it's a reality in families as well. When we all have families, and one of the problems is a lot of times we go to our job or our business or whatever else, and we run those things, on a schedule, and we know what to expect, and we're very intentional about things, and then we just come home and you know it's hard sometimes to figure out a sense of purpose and direction for the family unit. So that's something to talk about. Hey, Tal, welcome in. I'm 43 and I still can't drink water. It tries to choke me. I know. I don't know what it is about water, Tal. Water is deadly. It's the deadliest substance. That's my opinion. Agreed, always. Hey, Couchies, welcome in, welcome in, welcome in. Well, I guess we should address the elephant in the room. Yes, so today is in fact my birthday. I turned 50 years old today, so I've now been doing this life thing for a half a century, half 100 years. I'm on my way towards the end, and so it's given me a lot of opportunity, as I imagine it would anyone, but as many people at my age, at my ripe old age. I become reflective. And one of the things that I was thinking about this last week is all of the different kind of decades. If you break your life out by decades, like how do you look back? And this is something that I think we need to do more and more and more of, right? Being reflective is really important. And why do I say being reflective is important? It's because if we don't look back at what's behind, then sometimes it's hard for us to learn the lessons that we need to move ahead, right? So the question is, what does your practice of reflection look like? Do you have a practice of reflection? When you look, whenever you enter into a new decade of your life, do you look back? Do you look back on those stages of life and kind of try and figure out what those things look like? Jason Pfeiffer, who's the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, he published a podcast recently where he talks about how he looks at every 10 years of his life as having a theme. And I wonder if we could do that, right? So what have been the themes of your decades of life, right? And you could start from, I would say you could probably start from your 20s, right? Because before your 20s, really, a lot of stuff is still formational, right? And thank you for the happy birthday. I appreciate that. But in your 20s, like, what was the theme of your 20s? What were you doing in your 20s that was your overall theme, right? And if you're still in those 20s, then what can you look back at? What can you look at right now and say, oh, this is the theme of my life? When I think about my 20s, right? So in my 20s, I was in the end of college, and then I spent some time in Hollywood, working in the film industry, and then I spent some time teaching acting and working with kids. And so I really think of 20s equals kids. Yeah, no doubt. So, and I didn't have kids, right? Our kids weren't born until our oldest was born when we were 29. So that was really moving out of that chapter of our life. So for you, 20s might be kids, right? For me, it was really around finding out what it was that I did well, or what it was that I loved to do, I think. So I think 20s was really a process of discovering what it was that I loved to do. I'm only in my 20s though. Well, then you have a chance to look back and figure it out now before you're out of your 20s, right? We have a chance to kind of say, okay, well, what is the theme going to be, right? And then, I look into my 30s, and my 30s were really about parenting, right? Because both of my kids, the oldest was born when we were 29, and the youngest was born when we turned 39, and so we had that kind of 10 years in between. But for me, my 30s, I spent a lot of time in jobs that I kind of had to do, and really building up some idea of credibility, right? It was really about building credibility for me. It was about learning how to teach other people to lead, about how to build strong teams at work, and and that was kind of professionally. It was really a time of building credibility, and then my 40s, right? So what when it came down to my 40s, it was about really cementing myself. It was more about stability, trying to build some level of stability in my life by taking higher and higher positions and kind of working through that. Kind of honestly the same, trying to figure out what I am and what I want to be. Yeah, it's good. I mean, in your 20s, I think that's what you do. I worked at a photo lab for 5 years and then worked at Mohawk Carpet. Also got married in 2004. There you go. Let's see. What is this? I'm so used to being mom, I don't even know what to do with my life. Well, I mean, it's good, Kat, right? It's good to be mom. That's one of the most important things you can do. But the one thing that a lot of people find out is that when those years are over, when the mothering years are over, you have to have something left, right? And so the question you can be asking yourself now is, when I'm done with the phase of my life where I'm a mother, even though it seems like maybe it's never going to happen, but when you are done with that phase of your life, what will be left, right? Like, so what kinds of things are you establishing about your identity now? Because that'll make you that much healthier on the other side. Not that you should enjoy what you're doing any less, right? 20 to 30, Navy and kids. Yes, very good, very good. So, and have you asked yourself, like, what kinds of lessons was I learning during that time, right? What did I find out about myself? That's true. I agree. That's good. Yeah, and I know that you're smart enough to know that. Yes. So I'll just real quick tell, since you mentioned Mohawk carpet, and I have a Mohawk carpet sample. This is probably from, I don't know, probably from the late 70s. Some of you may have heard this before, but my grandma, my mom's mom, passed away. I don't know, it's probably 10 years ago now, maybe a little more than 10 years ago, right around that. Um, and when we went back to her house for the funeral, we went into the house, and this was one of those houses where, every year we would make a trip up there. My grandma lived in Colorado. We lived in Kansas most of those years, or Nebraska. And so we would make the trip. It would be a few hours, and we would go, and it would be a big thing. And all of the family, all of the aunts and uncles, we would all get together at grandma's house, all of the cousins, and we would just hang out there for whatever the duration was. We would take trips up into the mountains, and I can remember, we always get KFC, or there was two things. It was always KFC or Long John Silver's. It was one of those two things. We would always get those and go up into the mountains, and we would sit by a stream. We'd just find a river or a stream, and we'd sit there and we would eat our lunch by the river. So that was something that I always remembered growing up. And my grandma worked. She was widowed very early on. My grandfather died. My mom's dad died the same year that I was born. So just a little while before I was born. In fact, my mom found out that he had died as she was getting ready to go home to tell him that I was coming. So, never knew my grandpa, but my grandma worked very, very hard all those years. She was a child of the Depression, and so she was very, saved her money, did a really good job of investing and making sure that things were always taken care of, was very, very frugal. And as a result, she worked at a carpet store. So she did administrative work for a carpet store. And one of the ways that she was very frugal is, and again, she had a nice house, she had nice things, but in her living room, where we would all get together, and the kids would always sit at the coffee table. We would sit down around the coffee table when we would eat lunch. That would be the place that we would sit as the kids. And as we would sit around this coffee table, the coasters, sorry, camera's decided to focus on the picture instead of me. The coasters that we would use were these squares of carpet that my grandma had brought back. And they were samples. They were just samples so that you could see, what the kind of the quality of the carpet was from the vendor, in this case, Mohawk. And so these were the coasters that were on that coffee table. And so when we went back for the funeral and we all hung out, the thing that they said, my mom and my uncles, they said, "Hey, whatever you want to take from the house as, kind of as your, as your souvenir, as your inheritance, so to speak. Also, my grandmother did leave a little bit of money behind for everybody, which was awesome. They said, if you want something in the house to remember your grandmother by, take it, whatever it is. And so they came around to me and they said, what do you want? And I said, you know what? All I want is these carpet coasters. This is all I want. Because when I look at these, it reminds me not only of my childhood, but it reminds me of those things about my grandma, about how hard she worked and about how intentional she was with her finances and with the things that were in her life. So that was what I wanted. This is what I the only thing that I asked for was these. I think there are 4 of them, and they're these little carpet coasters, and they're the ones I use. And you know what? They're the best freaking coasters in the world because, as it turns out, this carpet really absorbs moisture really, really well. That story is really it's mostly just a story from my life, but it also talks about the importance of being intentional with our lives, right? The importance of marking time by the things that matter. Because my grandma, she had plenty of money, as it turns out. She was sitting on plenty of money when she died, and for her whole life. And but she did. It's not like she just sat back and just hoarded all of her money. She traveled the world. She did things that she loved, and so she lived a good life. But at the same time, she was very frugal and very specific. One of the things that was really important to her was family, right? Rose Nightshade, I miss this. I spent my 20s figuring out how to be an individual and living on my own. 30s was being married and being a parent. Still trying to figure out the 40s. Rose, I think that the 40s is kind of it was one of the ones that I had the hardest time, even though I just came out of it, right? I feel like I had the hardest time kind of figuring out what that was all about as well. My 50s, somebody asked me the other day, well, so what's the theme going to be for your 50s? What are you being intentional about? And I think it really is for me, it's around ownership. It's around taking ownership. And in my 30s and 40s, I went a lot of places that I had to go and did a lot of things that I had to do, right? Because other people had needs of me or because I needed to learn certain things. But now that I've gotten to a certain place in my life, it's time for me to really take ownership over all of the different aspects of my life. Some of that has to do with my business, right? Taking ownership over the business and saying, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And some of it has to do with just taking ownership over individual parts of my life. And I feel like I came out of my 40s learning a lot of lessons about intentionality and about really being specific about how I looked at things. And now it's time for me to live those things, right, over the next decade. 30s have been a very tumultuous time between switching jobs and dealing with husbands switching jobs. Yeah, and I think that you have to, I think that your 30s actually is kind of a good time to do some of that stuff, Tal, because you still have a lot of time ahead of you. And so the great thing about my 30s is I spent my 30s making a ton of mistakes. Now, don't get me wrong. I intend to spend my 50s also making a ton of mistakes. But I made a ton of mistakes during my 30s. Made a lot of missteps along the way. But I don't have any regrets about making mistakes. I have regrets about the way that I dealt with some of those things. But as I always say, I'm not the person I am today unless I was the person that I was then. So I'm grateful that I made all of those mistakes back then, and that I learned that making those mistakes or having failures in my life was not the end of the world, right? Was not the end of my life. And that's the thing. I think the earlier on we learned that lesson, that failure is not the end, the quicker we can take ownership, right? Or become intentional about our lives. No more learning. Yeah, head of steel. I agree. No more learning. Done with it. Husband is dealing with lots of mistakes also. Is it a guy thing? I don't know if it's necessarily a guy thing. I think it's a human thing, but I think there is something, especially in the United States, right, where we have very specific gender expectations still, right? I think that there is a degree to which men in this society are not really kind of taught how to balance some things. And the balance is not a word that I love. So maybe hold things in tension. I think that men in our society are not always really good, or we're not really good at teaching men how to hold those things in tension, right? The idea of the job and the home, right? Of the emotional and the rational aspect, right? Of all of those things. I I think that there was a big period through kind of the middle of the last century, where we spent a lot of time telling men that they just had to figure it out. That being a man was just being conflicted and living with it, right? And so, I'm not making a case here for like for us to say, oh, there's no such thing as, there's no difference in the experience of the man and the woman. There's clearly a difference between the male and the female experience. I mean, you can look at wages, you can look at rights, you can look at all of those things, right? And tremendous disadvantages that women have had in the American society. But on the other hand, I think there are silent disadvantages that men have also had. And yes, some of it is like, hey, that's a very first world problem, right? Like, oh, you've got it so hard, right? You're getting paid twice as much as a woman, but you're a little internally conflicted. I get that, and I understand that, but I do also think that because it compounded from generation to generation, it turned into a little bit of a crisis, and I think that's part of why we don't really, we're trying to rediscover kind of what it is, what it is to be a man in this society, and to be vulnerable, and to be able to fail. And when I think back on many of my failures over the course of the year, many of them were driven by the fact that I was afraid of failure because I learned growing up. And I'm not saying anybody taught me this. I'm not saying this was something that like my mom or my dad ever told me or that was in a textbook. But like I grew up with an understanding that to be a strong man, you had to avoid failure at all costs. And so something that I try and teach young men right now is that being a strong person, whether it's man or woman, but specifically when I'm talking to men, is that it's not about not failing. It's not about not failing at all. It's about what you do with the failures that you're inevitably going to have. We're all going to fail. Every one of us is going to mess up. There's no avoiding that. But the question is, what do you do with it? Do you bury it? Do you hide it? Do you run from it? Do you lie about it? Or do you own up to it? Do you accept it, and do you learn from it? Because only when you do those last three things, when you own up to it, when you accept it, and you learn from it, only then can you really incorporate failure into your personality in a way that will lead you into a better future. Let's see, even Frank Sinatra has regrets. Too few to mention. Too few. I've had a few. Definitely human. No one's perfect. That's okay, as long as you're learning from it and always trying your best. Agreed. I know darn well I'm not perfect. I mess up a lot. That's good. Good thing is he's reflecting on losing his last job, eager to plan for more for the future, we will say. That's good, Tal. That's very good. Rose, some choices you don't realize are a mistake until hindsight. That's true. And that's where you've got to give yourself a little bit of space. And don't get me wrong. Like I said, I'm all for a certain degree of being hard on yourself. Now, I know that this is not a tremendously popular line here, because there's this big pendulum. You guys are familiar of the concept of the pendulum, right? The pendulum in the clock, for those of you who have clocks still, it's that thing that swings back and forth, right? But the idea with the pendulum, when it comes to society, when it comes to anthropology, is that culturally, the pendulum tends to swing very far from one direction to the other, right? Very far from one direction. And so the thing about it is the pendulum swung very far from that culture that I was talking about, where like it's not okay, to admit that you have feelings or failures or vulnerability and those things. And it has swung kind of too far to the other side, in my opinion, where it's like, well, we just need to. I had a coach one time tell me that I just needed to sit in my feelings, and if that works for you, then that's great. If that's it. But the thing is, I don't want to always sit in my feelings. I want to acknowledge them, but then I want to move on to the next productive thing. And that's what I want for the people that I work with too, is for them to be moving towards the next progressively important thing. So what I'm saying is it's okay to feel feelings. It's really important to love yourself and to feel good about yourself. But I see too many people stop there, right? And I think sometimes we need to be just a little bit harder on ourselves in the right places. The problem is we tend to be hard on ourselves in the wrong places. We tend to be hard on ourselves in the places where we do not have control over our lives, and not as hard in the very small areas that we do. Now we're back to James Clear and Atomic Habits, right? The very small 1% changes that we can make, those disciplines that we could build, those are the areas where we can be a little tough on ourselves. Not that we should get into a self-loathing situation, but where we should challenge ourselves to be a little better every day, right? But you're right, Rose. Sometimes you don't realize that a choice was a mistake until you get back. And then the great thing about that is the discipline of reflection allows you to go back, dissect that, and figure out when it became a mistake. That's the important thing. I hate the men don't cry or show emotion. I know, Kitty Cat, I'm not a big fan. Definitely want to show Juju that it's okay to show emotion, just don't stay there forever. Exactly. You said it better than I just said it, Kitty Cat. That's exactly it. You should be able to experience an emotion. You should be able to acknowledge an emotion, but then you should be able to move on, right? In despite of it or in the presence of it. In our leadership program, the first thing they said was fail first, fail. First attempt in learning. Yes. A lot of the greatest entrepreneurs of all time talk about the concept of fail fast and often, right? Fail fast and often, because by cycling through all of the things that you don't work, you're going to get much faster to the things that do. So I think that's a good thing. Oh, fail is first attempt in learning. I like that. That's good. I get that. Good acronym. I was the only one who took notes on that. Well, the other people are behind then, Tal. I can always admit my mistakes, Cowboy, and they make me stronger and I learn. I never feel like I'm productive enough. Well, let's break that down for just a second. This my brain goes to this, right? Let's break that down. I never feel like I'm productive enough. I never feel like I'm getting far enough. So many of my clients come to me specifically because they feel like they're stuck, right? They feel like they're stuck in life, that there's a hurdle that they need to get over. And I hear this a lot. I feel like I'm not productive enough. But what do you need in order to feel productive? How would you know if you're productive? See, the problem is that too many of us don't have a measure. We just sit back and wait to feel productive, right? But what if a business ran that way? What if I ran my business that way? And I just said, you know what? I'm gonna do whatever I can, and then I'm just gonna wait to feel like, the business is doing well. I can't do that, right? If I did that, my business is gonna fail financially because I have certain metrics that I need to look at. So what are the metrics that you need to feel productive? And if we go back to James Clear, the idea is that the problem is a lot of times we base our feeling of productivity on our goals, on our long-term goals. But when we do that and we don't get there right away, what do? We feel unproductive. So what should we base our feeling of productivity on? I'll tell you. We should base it on our habits. We should base it on our disciplines. The question is, did you do the things that you have to do to get to the goals that you want to achieve? Did you do them 1% better today? Or did you do them at all? Because if you didn't, if you know, hey, I need to get up, I need to, I don't know, whatever it is, if you're a content creator, right? I need to get up, I need to shoot a video, I need to edit a video, I need to get a video posted. I need to do 5 social media posts, right? If you got up and you didn't do any of those things, are you unproductive? Yes, you are unproductive because you've actually failed to produce. But if you get up and you do all of those things and you just don't feel as good about them, did you still do them? Yes, you did. Did you achieve the victory conditions? Yes, you did. And on some days, if you don't get everything done as well as you want it, you got to let it go, right? Because you did the things, and you got to believe that every day doing the things and doing them just a little bit better than the day before. It doesn't have to be these big leaps. We don't have to have these big leaps, just a little bit better than the day before. That's production. Kitty says, never be afraid if you don't see the effects immediately. Exactly. It's not about the long-term effects. It's about the individual daily disciplines. Tal says, it's rare to see a man admit that. Hey, what's up, Astro Gaming? How's it going? Welcome in. It's good to see you. Sorry, I got behind in chat a little bit there because we had a commercial break, but good to see you here. Thanks for coming in. Rob says, I always try to do more and keep working harder and harder. That's good. Just make sure that you're not always trying to do more. You're always trying to do the important things better, right? This is the paradigm that you should be building for your life. It's not about adding things on, right? It's not about adding, I need one more thing. I need another thing. I was in a conference yesterday, and I was in a session that was talking about employees and employee well-being and how we can help people build balance in their lives. And you automatically know I went into that in an antagonistic way because I don't believe balance is a good paradigm to build. But there were these three. There was a psychologist and two social workers that were leading this panel. And they were talking about all the things, how you can help connect with your employees, and sometimes you just got to go sit on the grass, and sometimes you can take them out after, for things. And my question at the end, and because, I'm a disruptor, I'm a maven. So at the end, they asked for question and answer, and I raised my hand. I was the last person to ask a question. And I said this. I said, hey, I'm a consultant and I work with businesses. And here's what I see. I see a lot of businesses trying to build employee engagement or morale or whatever you want to call it. They try and build those things by adding additional things on. Oh, we're going to have a bowling night, or we're going to have an employee appreciation week, right? Or we're going to have this, or we're going to have that. And I said, I'll tell you what, those things don't work. They might be fun for like a minute, but a lot of times, because these companies aren't working to really engage their employees in the things that are important, people don't come, or they make fun of them. I mean, I know when I was at the bank and we had our employee appreciation week, it was a joke every week. So my question to these people was, instead of adding things in, what can we do as organizations to make sure that we're connecting people to the things that are most important to them, to make sure that they feel good about the time they spend at work? Because I think that's what makes people happy. Because think about it. If you have a job and you have to go and it feels meaningless, you don't have any understanding of like how it connects to anything important in the world, you're just there for the paycheck. How fulfilling is that? None fulfilling at all. But if you had a job and you went every day and you knew, hey, this is how my contribution counts. This is what I do for this company, and this is why that's important. Which employee is more engaged? I'll tell you, the studies show that it's the person who understands how their job actually plays into the long-term success of the company and what it wants to do, right? So my question to them was, how do we do that organizationally? And they didn't have a whole lot of good answers for that. They had a few things, but let me bring this back into your life, right? You could add a lot of things. You could add a ton of things to your life. You could add, you know what? I'm going to start, making 5 videos a day, right? Adding something. Oh, you know what? I'm going to do a new stream, and this time, instead of just doing my regular stream, I'm going to add some kind of crazy aspect to it every time somebody does some kind of crazy thing, right? And yeah, some of these are gimmicks and they're fun and they're good and they're engaging, right? But here's the thing. If you want to grow in your personal life, and I'm using streaming as an example because a lot of us do it. If you want to grow in your personal life, if you want to grow your audience, right? Those things aren't going to grow your personal life. They're not going to grow your audience. They might be fun. They might be distracting. They might keep things from getting boring. You know what will grow you in your personal life and grow your audience. If you're a streamer, and again, I'll just go back to this. If you're a streamer, you know what will grow your audience. I'll tell you. Having a consistent schedule, sticking to it, not deviating, not trying to play so many different varieties of games that people who come to your stream don't know what to expect, right? Having a brand that's like consistent so that people know what to expect from you. These are little disciplines, right? All of these are little things. Consistency, discipline. Those are the things that will grow you. This is the same as in life. The things that will grow you are the things that you do consistently, not the things you add. The things you add are the cherry on top, right? They're the good things. They're not the best things. The best things are your habits, right? So start with your habits. Head of Steel, a psychologist, 2 social workers walk into a bar. I like it. It's always hard for me feeling productive because, as Orpheus knows, I've said it before, my expectations for myself are stupid and high, and I always think I could do more. I feel like employee appreciation stuff is always half-baked. So 2 things, Rob. First of all, I'll tell you, one of the reasons you don't feel productive and you feel like your expectations are too high is because you don't have solid metrics for success. You don't have solid metrics for success, right? What is it that you're chasing? Like I've always said, if you're chasing a number, if you're chasing a dollar amount, if you're chasing any of those things, you're gonna feel unproductive, right? What is it that you're really chasing? What is it that you really, really want to be doing? Focus on that. Make that the victory condition. Then you'll feel more productive. Second, employee appreciation stuff is always half-baked. Yes, because it is a Band-Aid. It is not fixing the core problem that most companies have. What is the core problem that most companies have? Many large companies, the core problem that they have is that the people who are making the decisions are too far away from the people who are doing the work. Hey, Sword Lord Stu, what's up, dude? Welcome in. And what happens is when the people who are making the decisions are too far away from the people who are doing the work, there's a disconnect in how that work actually matters. Because I don't care who you are or what you do, if you believe that what you do matters in some way, you will do it well. If you are like most people. Now, there's some people who are just, for whatever reason, right? They're never going to work, hard. They will be unmotivated. But the vast majority of people, if they're doing something that they believe in and that matters, they'll do it well. As well as they can. And that's why employee appreciation programs don't work, because companies aren't taking the time to show people. They're just saying, oh, we love you. You guys are so important to us, but they're not telling them why. And more importantly, the managers who are sitting in those offices are not telling them why. Why what they do makes a difference. Tal says, our company's having a 30th anniversary for the warehouse in August. We have a choice of either a work meal during the workday or Saturday picnic, and they're letting the associates decide. I mean, that's good, right? Like those kinds of decisions. But again, like, what does that matter if the job that you're doing isn't important, right? It's nice for one day, but it's one day, right? One day. Employee appreciation should be something that a company works on every day of the year. It's something that should be the most important thing to managers. And if it's not, that's a bad manager. You can quote me on that one. If a manager's first duty is not employee appreciation and pouring everything they can into the people that they're responsible for, they're a bad manager. Because their job is to add value to those people who add values to their customers. Right? That's how it gets done. That's good management. Oh boy, I'm all over the place in my game genres. Kitty cat. So what I'm saying is this, right? As always, it depends on your motivations, right? If you just want to do what you want to do for fun, then do whatever you want to do. That's totally fine. But if you wanted to make it a career, right? If you want to make a career out of streaming, then you would have to become specific about some things. If that was like a real goal that you wanted to grow to a certain size, then you would want to start to figure out what's working and what's not working, right? So, but it's totally, I mean, it's fine to do whatever you want if you're doing it for fun. Totally acceptable. Sword Lord Stu, welcome in, dude. Good to see you. Kyle, I love the fact that our head of warehouse has roundtable meetings with the associates and he came off the floor. That is good. That's good. I'm going to write that down. Head of sale, thank you for writing that down. If your manager's first duty is not employee appreciation, they're a bad manager. Hands down. I agree with that. Most important role for a manager. Exactly. Just like when I was at Best Buy, I tell this story time and time again, but it's one of my favorite stories. I was walking through, I had an award-winning team. They were one of the best sales teams in the entire company. Other stores would send their people to train with the people that worked with me. And we were walking through. I was walking through with like a regional manager one day. And one of my dudes was walking by. He was carrying like a printer box or something like that. And the regional manager came in and he's like, hey, how did you do this? You live in one of the worst markets in the whole world. And, you know, but your team is performing way, way above these high-end metropolitan markets. How are you doing it? And I said, you know, I told him, first of all, I'm not doing it. We're doing it, right? It's something that my team agreed to do. We sat down and we talked about how we were going to do it, and we're executing on it. And I said, second, and I looked over at Aaron, who was carrying the printer box. I'm like, hey, Aaron, what's my job? And without even dropping a beat, Aaron said, your job is to make my job easier. And then he just kept walking on by. And I turned to the regional manager and I said, that is what we did. What we did right there is we all agreed that it's everybody's job to make everybody else's job easier. Or the way that I expressed it to the team, it's everybody's job is to make somebody else look better. Everybody else's job is to make somebody's life better on a daily basis. Not to worry about their own, right? But to make somebody else's job and life and experience better. And those are the teams that were most successful. But the reason those employees were highly engaged is because they knew they were appreciated. Not just because they got a bonus or a handout or an extra day off or any of that stuff, right? In fact, a lot of times they didn't get that stuff. A lot of times they worked twice as hard as some of the other departments who were not as successful. But they were all highly engaged. And the reason they were all highly engaged is because they knew that what they did mattered to the team. And that was important to them. And people who that wasn't important to decided they didn't want to stay anymore. I didn't fire. This was a stretch of maybe 3 or 4 years. I didn't fire anybody because I didn't have to. Because the people who weren't performing well took a look around and realized, oh, it's because I don't fit in here. Because the expectation is I'm here for other people, not for myself. There's nothing more poisonous in the world than being in it for yourself. If there's one virtue that I could just like hand people and say, here's your ticket to success, it's humility. Right? And humility is not this idea of, I'm going to put myself at the bottom of the stack. It's not that. As C.S. Lewis famously said, humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less, right? Humility is showing up anywhere without a sense of ego and without a sense of, hey, I'm going to find out what's in it for me. It's being able to let go of those things to support a bigger team or a bigger community. And if you ask me one thing that I've seen that has led to success in people more than anything else, it would be that trait right there. Let's see. Tal says, I'm part of the activities community and safety team, and our manager team does try to do things with our associates. The culture has grown and changed over the years. Good. That makes sense. That's how I worked in a manager role. I felt like everyone else's life should be easier. Exactly. And now don't get me wrong. It's not about doing stuff that you shouldn't be doing, right? The problem with a lot of managers who put themselves in that, they're like, okay, I'm going to get in and I'm just going to make sure that everybody's job is easier. So I'm going to get in and just do whatever. Nobody's going to do anything but me. I'm just going to get in and do all this stuff, right? That's not the same thing, right? A lot of young managers especially make that mistake. And some of them, it's because they think, well, I can do it better than anybody else. And some of it's because, well, I don't want people to feel like their job is hard. That's not it. That ain't it, guys. The real challenge is making sure that people are working hard and that they know that when things hit the fan, that there's somebody who's got their back. And if there's something that falls apart, there's somebody who's going to jump in and work side by side with them to make sure that it's going to get fixed. Somebody who's going to make sure that things are thought about strategically in advance. So they're not just trying to make decisions based on whatever's in front. Somebody who's going to build values in so that they know what is expected and what isn't expected of them, right? That's what people really want. Not somebody just to make it so they don't have to work. I mean, some people do want that. But again, those aren't people you want on your team in the first place. We also had a manager that came from shipping off the floor and loading trucks. He made a world of difference on our departments. We had a rough first year because we were in survival mode, but he's turned our department around. I mean, that's it, right? I would say with a leader, as a leader, if you're going to be a leader, so if you want to be a leader, write this down. If you don't want to be a leader, if you don't want to be a reader, then you should listen to audiobooks. If you don't want to be a leader, then write this down anyway, because I've got bad news for you. You are, or you will be. There's nobody in the world that doesn't encounter a situation at some point where they have to lead. And everybody in the world, whether you want to be the biggest, the biggest head honcho in the corner office, or whether all you want to do is just be the best, whatever it is that you want to be, you're going to find yourself in a position at some point in your life where you have to lead. And so everybody should know the most important principles of leadership, because you're never think about it. You're never in a position where you have to lead when it's not needed. The only time we put people in positions of leadership is when we need a leader. And if you're there, you're it. And you may not be qualified, and you may not be ready, and you may not be confident, right? But when the time comes, you've got to step up. And so the best way to step up is by always being ready. Best way to be ready is to think ahead, right? So, all of that to say, the thing about being a leader, the first thing about being a leader, and again, write this down. You don't have to write it down, but remember this. Number one, humility, right? If you are a leader because you want the title of a leader, you're probably not a leader. I've known tons of CEOs and managers and executives that have the title but aren't leaders. And guess what? They don't do very well. Right? Because they usually don't have teams that want to work for them. So number one is humility. And number two is vulnerability. Right? You've got to be able to, if you want to be a leader, you've got to be able to go to your team and say, hey, listen, here's the thing. I am human. I am doing my best. But there are some things that I need to work on. Now, if you ask me, one of the best things to do, of course, is to know your working geniuses. You all know that I do the 6 types. I'm a certified facilitator for the 6 types of working genius. And these are things that help us kind of figure out what our overall profile is, right? We have 2 things about work that we really love, that we're really energized by, and usually we're really good at those. And then we have 2 things that we don't love, we're not energized by, they suck energy out of us, and we usually suck at them, right? And so I tell leaders when I take them through this process, the first thing you got to do is you got to go back and tell your teams, hey, these are my frustrations. These are the things that I'm not good at and that I don't love. And that sometimes I actually am good at, but man, they're really hard for me. Because that provides the team with the ability to empathize and go, oh, okay. So when I see you doing that thing that I know is hard for you, I'm going to respect that a little bit more. Or maybe if that's something that you really, it really sucks energy from you, but it's something that I love doing or don't mind doing, maybe sometimes I can step in and do that for you. Right? So vulnerability, humility, vulnerability, 2 incredibly important aspects of a leader. And then the third is trust. You have to have an almost unnervingly optimistic trust of people. You cannot be a great leader if you are always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And this is why I tell individuals, if you're a pessimist, or if you think you're a realist, which means you're a pessimist and you don't like the sound of that word, you need to find a path to optimism. Because until you start to trust people and forgive people, trust and forgiveness are very close. Until you can learn to trust and forgive, then you will never be a great leader. And in fact, you'll never really grow very much as an individual. There's the one type of people that I don't, that I'm always, I want to say this the right way. The one group of people that I will always end up kind of growing away from in my life, in my experience, is people who can't forgive. Because Marky Mark, thanks for the resub, man. Happy 9 months. Hey, we got a Twitch baby, Marky Mark. Let's see. Let's call it Morpheus. Well, Morpheus, that makes sense. Morpheus is better. Man, don't hang around people who can't forgive, guys. Forgiveness is the most pure. It's the most pure expression of humanity, of what it is to be human. And people who can't forgive, they're never gonna move you towards a growth mindset. Lack of forgiveness always comes from a fixed mindset, and no one grows out of a fixed mindset. So just keep that in mind. If you got people in your life who are not forgivers, just remember they're not going to move you towards your progression of becoming a better person. Let's see. Our manager help us throw a product in the lines, a clear cage, the platform. That's great. I love that. John does a really good job of being a leader at work. When he's instructing and leading others with their job, people really love him. Makes me so proud of him and everything he does. Kat, I'm not surprised by that at all. Knowing John, the little bit that I do, I mean, we're long distance friends, but we're friends. I'm not surprised because I can see that in his character. One of the things that I definitely see about John is humility, and I'll tell you how I know. This is one of the reasons I love both of you, actually. You both really have this humility, is that you approach everything from the standpoint of supporting other people. Even when you guys are kind of in, quote unquote, in the spotlight, you're always highlighting other people. And that's how I know that you guys approach everything from a standpoint of humility. And that is why I love you guys. That's why I think you're such great people. I need help with conflict resolution, says Tal. I don't think I ever learned that when I was younger. Holy cow, it's an Orpheus. What's up, Marky? Tal, conflict resolution is really good. So this is a thing. I can spend a whole hour on conflict sometime. Because one of the problems is we have a tendency to avoid conflict. Because at some point, a lot of us get taught that conflict is bad, but in fact, conflict is super important. The trick is making sure it's the right kind of conflict. We must always seek conflict over ideas, because when we don't allow for conflict over ideas, it twists and becomes the shadow of itself and turns into conflict over people. And it's okay to have conflict over ideas. Hey, I don't think that's a great idea. No, that's not going to work. Hey, that thing you said was stupid, right? Those things. It's not okay to have conflict over people. Oh, I'm going to listen to your idea, and I'm going to say, yeah, that was great. And then I'm going to go tell somebody else, hey, did you hear that dumb idea that person had, right? Or, yeah, absolutely, 100%. But then I'm going to go, I'm not really going to commit to that. I'm just going to wait because I think it's going to fail. I'm going to sit back and try and watch you fail, right? Conflict should be over ideas, not over people. And when we don't allow it over ideas, then it becomes over people. Kitty Cat, forgiving is hard and takes a lot of work, but it is possible. It is super hard. And it takes a super lot of work. That's why it's one of the most important things you could possibly do. When I talk about humility, forgiveness is the ultimate expression of humility, right? And if you want to go briefly to a spiritual place with it, right? When you talk about the biblical concept of forgiveness, right, of God forgiving all of humans, right? So, and the thing is this, right? So if we break the Bible down very quickly, it goes like this: God creates humans, right? And He says, hey. Very simple rule. All you got to do is, do this one thing and everything's going to be fine. humans immediately do the one thing that they're not supposed to do. Million worlds of possibilities, they do the one thing they're not supposed to do. That breaks that relationship down, right? And that creates this ongoing barrier between the creator and the creation. And this is what we call, I'm going to use the word sin here, right? But a lot of people are like, sin, oh, that means drinking, gambling, smoking, killing other people, murdering your wife. No. Sleeping with your wife. No, that's okay. Sleeping with someone else's wife. I don't know. Anyway, right? All of these things that we want to say, oh, that's sin, that's sin, that's sin, that's sin. The reality of sin in the Bible is just that gap that's created between the creator and the creation, because the creation moves further and further away from the future that they were designed for, right? And then there comes a moment where, where that same God, right, that same creator says, okay, I'm going to go through this incredibly hard process that's actually going to cost me my life, right? But the purpose of that is forgiveness. And so you have this gigantic, celestial, unknowable, unimaginable being, right, that brings himself down. I'm using the him pronoun. I know that God is not gendered, but I'm being a traditionalist here. Brings himself down to the place where he is the ultimate model of humility and forgiveness. And that's the most humbling thing possible. To go from to know that you're the biggest thing in the universe and to make yourself the smallest thing. And that's why forgiveness has got to be a part of our DNA. Because if humility is the pathway to growth, which I believe it is, there's nothing that shows more humility than forgiveness. And when we cannot forgive, or when we say we can't, or more importantly, when we say we won't forgive, that just shows that we're driven by our ego. We're not really driven by love. We're actually driven by ego. And ego is the root of evil, right? So take that for what it is. Learning to forgive shows your true strength. Agreed. Tal had a coworker on the phone while on equipment. I lost my cool. Not going to lie. We have a no tolerance policy for not using phones on the floor, especially on equipment. Yeah, I mean, that's right. So the thing is, Tal, there are rules, right? There are rules. The rules are there for a reason. And so sometimes it's okay to get upset with somebody. We cannot control the way that we feel about things always. That's not entirely true. I'm going to redact that statement. I'm going to retract that statement, rather. I'm going to retract that statement and say we do have a measure of control over the way that we feel. Emotions are predictive. They're not reactive. We like to think that emotions get triggered. Emotions don't get triggered. Emotions happen because our brain is predicting an outcome. And our brain predicts an outcome based on our past experience and our thought processes. And so we can actually change the way we feel about things by changing the way we predict things. So all of that to say, sometimes in the moment, you cannot control what other people do, and sometimes you can't always control what your immediate feeling is about that. What we can control is the way we react to it, right? And so that's always the key, is in that moment, what's most important? Because when the guy cuts me off on the freeway, at that moment, I get mad. And why do I get mad? What's the story that I'm telling myself? The story that I'm telling myself is, oh, this jerk here thinks he's more important than me, right? And what's that come back down to? It comes back down to my ego, right? He thinks he's more important than me, and so that diminishes me. Well, maybe that's the case. Maybe it's not the case. I don't have the control necessarily over that feeling, but I can control that mindset and go, you know what? That's a thing that person did. I don't know why they did it. I don't like that they did it, but I'm not going to retaliate, right? Because of it. Because I know that I don't understand the circumstances that are happening on the other side of that, on the other side of that window. I'm not going to retaliate. So it becomes a question of how do we approach it, right? That's what we have control over. Or they could cause an accident by cutting you off. Exactly. Absolutely. So there are good reasons to be upset. But if I allow that upsetness, that upset feeling, to drive me to a thoughtless course of action where I'm just lashing out, what I'm doing is the exact opposite of what I should be doing. I'm being the opposite of being a higher elevated human, right? What reacts to its atmosphere? An animal reacts to its atmosphere. What reacts on instinct? An animal reacts on instinct. We're unique. Humans are unique in all of the natural world in that we have the ability to assign meaning to things. So, you know what? I'm going to drive towards my humanity. And I don't always succeed, right? Sometimes I say that thing that I shouldn't say. Sometimes I react in that way that I shouldn't react. And then I have to go back and I have to go, okay, why did I allow myself to get to this place? What caused that? Like what's in my past that said, oh, this is what you should expect. This is why you should expect people to be evil or to be mean or to, whatever. And how can I avoid doing that in the future, right? How can I build that, that ladder towards not reacting that way? And most importantly, how can I sincerely apologize to the people, that I've acted wrongly against? How we get out of that animal mindset for reactions. I think the key is, Tal, that you just keep trying every single time. And every time that somebody does something that that triggers, I'm going to use the word triggers. I don't like the terminology, but every time you do something that triggers a reaction like that, teach yourself to stop. And teach yourself to ask a question before you react. And make that question something like, I wonder why they did that. And if you can, if it's appropriate, ask the person in that moment, why are you doing that? Right? Because then, once you know why they're doing it, then you have the ability to assign meaning. So if there's a person who is, who, let's say they're on their phone, right? When they're not supposed to be on the phone, the quick response to that is, hey, that's against the rules. Hey, stop doing that. It's against the rules. And then to be upset with the person. But sometimes it's okay to stop and go, okay, why are they doing this? And then to go, hey, how come you're on your phone? You're not supposed to do that. And then maybe you could find out what the context is. Maybe the context is positive. Maybe it's like, hey, I've got somebody who's in the hospital and I'm just checking up on him. Okay, cool. I mean, you're still not supposed to be on the phone. But at least I understand the context behind it, right? Or maybe on the other hand, it's, oh, I'm just on my phone because nobody cares, right? Well, now we have a different conversation. Now we have a right to be a little bit more upset. But more importantly, we can have a conversation about, hey, you know what? Somebody does care. And that somebody is me. So when I see you doing that thing, it actually is making me, it's actually taking away from my experience because I'm distracted by what you're doing, because I know that it's not safe, because we have rules and standards and expectations here. And because you're not living up to them. And I think that you need to, right? Because I think the whole team needs to. So stopping and asking that question and then asking it of the person when it's appropriate gives us the ability to break out of that animal response that we all have. Oh, I'm glad it's helping you. Tal. Well, listen, guys, that's my time. I have taken up an hour of your time. The problem is setting boundaries. Sometimes, what if they don't follow? So, Kitty Cat, that depends on where your position is in the organization, right? So, organizationally, if you are a leader, it is up to you to define what the core values are of a team, to create clarity around those, to continuously over communicate those, and to reinforce those by calling them out whenever they happen, right? So if you're a leader, for example, my one of my teams, right, we say that we have 3 core values. The core values are this: we are empathetic. In other words, we really try and we try and feel what other people feel, right, so that we can understand them. We're humble, which means we think about others before we think about ourselves. And the third one is we are considerate. So not only do we try and feel as others feel, but we try and take that feeling into account when we act or before we act. So if I see a member of my team and they're doing something that's unthinking, I will go to that person and I'll say, hey, you're not being considerate right now. Considerate is one of the things that we are. Talk to me about why you've chosen not to do that. And they can go, oh, you know what? I didn't think about it. You're absolutely right. I'm not considerate. I'm going to change my pattern. Or they can go, well, I don't want to do that. That's not me. And at that point I can say, hey, these are the expectations. This is what we live out. If you don't like that, I can't make you do it, but you're not going to be happy working here over the long haul, because this is what we're going to do every single day. We're going to be empathetic, we're going to be humble, and we're going to be considerate. So if that's not for you, it's just going to be hard for you working here. And then the next time, I'm going to call them out on it again, and the next time, and the next time, and the next time. And the other people on the team, the other people on my team feel comfortable calling each other out on those things. They feel comfortable being accountable to each other, because they all know that my expectation as the leader is that people are empathetic, that they're humble, and that they're considerate. And so, my person working in the office right now knows that if they call second person on it and they're like, hey, that wasn't considerate at all, like, we are considerate here, and that person comes and complains to me, then that the person who made the accusation is going to know that I'm going to say, was it considerate? Because if it wasn't considerate, that's what we do here. We do considerate here. We are considerate. So they know that I'm going to reinforce it, because I've taken time to communicate and clarify the actual values of the workspace. So it's important that you have strong leadership there, right? Taking up an hour. No, it's all a learning experience. I feel like because our job is so fast paced, trigger is a good word for my instant response. Thank you for an action plan for me to keep in mind. Of course, you're welcome. Listen, guys, I'm going to let you go. It has been amazing. Thank you guys so much for being with me. I appreciate you more than I could possibly say. This is the best possible way that I could think of. Thanks, Orpheus Later Taters. See you, Head of Steel. This is the best possible way that I can think of to spend my 50th birthday, having an hour to hang out with you guys. I really appreciate you all. And I hope that, maybe you've learned something today, or maybe you heard something today that made you angry and you think I'm an idiot. And I welcome that, because we only get better when we come into conflict with our own ideas. So I welcome that. Happy birthday again. Thank you. Thank you, Kitty Cat. Be great. Let's go, Couchies. By Orpheus. Side note, Marky Mark, I forgot about that, dude. Congratulations, by the way. I think I knew that the baby came, but I don't think I've talked to you since then, dude. Congrats, man. I'm so excited. I hope everything's going really well. Let's definitely catch up at some point here. Gosh, so many things to say about being a parent and all of the exciting lessons that you're learning. I'm excited to hear about your journey on that. So congrats, dude. All right, my friends, listen, I'm going to let you go. I appreciate you all. I want you to have a good day. Just remember that every one of you has a moment of greatness that's waiting for you, but it's not coming for you. You have to pursue your moment. So go be great. I love you guys. I'll see you soon.